afternoon. Welcome to Finding Your Inner Mr. Rogers. I'm Todd Faber, and I believe that in a world of noise and speed, the most radical thing we can be is kind. We often think of leadership as being in charge, but Fred Rogers taught us that true leadership is about being in service to the dignity of others. Today's guest is Larry DiCara, a legendary civic leader, attorney, and author who has spent more than 5 decades shaping the political, legal, and structural landscape of the city of Boston. Making history in 1972 as the youngest person ever elected to the Boston City Council, and later serving as its president, Larry became a foundational architect of the city's modern era, navigating Boston through the turbulent periods of desegregation, fiscal crisis, and a rapid urban development. A graduate of Harvard College, the Kennedy School, and Boston University School of Law, he has spent his legal career guiding major institutional expansions while quietly mentoring generations of public servants across Massachusetts. He's the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, Turmoil and Transition, and the recently published novel, Frothingham, a compelling work of fiction that explores the intricate web of Boston's history, class, and politics. Larry scales Fred Rogers' legacy directly into the halls of government and civic policy. He proves that the ultimate duty of a public servant is to act as a steady, empathetic anchor for their community, ensuring that as the city grows and changes, its history is preserved and its most vulnerable neighbors are never left behind. Welcome to the neighborhood, Larry.
Great to be here.
I'm thrilled that you're here. You are a mentor to many and somebody that I have the utmost respect for, having worked a little bit with you and seen you in action over my 25, 30 years here in Boston. So it's great you're here. You really are a stalwart in the Boston community, and you truly epitomize everything that I'm trying to accomplish with this podcast. So with that, I'd love to ask you some questions.
Absolutely.
So as I set this up, and I've interviewed a number of people so far, and I've created archetypes for many of them. Your archetype, in my estimation, is what I would call the historic peacemaker. You were the youngest person ever elected to the Boston City Council, and you stepped right into the fire of the 1970s busing crisis, a time when the literal definition of a Boston neighborhood became a source of intense conflict and racial division. Fred Rogers has spent his entire life protecting the safety of that little neighborhood ecosystem. So when a city's community lines become a battleground, how did you find the emotional mindfulness to advocate for peace and healing instead of just taking a side?
Well, I was at law school while I was on the city council. So I'd studied constitutional law, and I knew that the desegregation order was the law of the land. Clear as can be. I've given lectures about it. And I decided to try to be able to speak to everybody. Since the city council sits alphabetically, I sat next to Louise Day Hicks. Louise Day Hicks and I disagreed on a lot of the big issues, but we could deal with each other. We could talk, and that's so important. On more than one occasion, she suggested to me, you really shouldn't go to that meeting. It may not be safe. Very motherly. She was old enough to be my mother, in a very motherly way. And I think way down deep, a lot of those folks who were on the front lines of the anti-busing movement were not half as bad as they're portrayed. That doesn't mean what they were saying was legally accurate. And I think in their own way, they were interested in the people of the city. And it was an ugly time. The city had enough strength. We made it through it. What also happened with the desegregation order is a whole bunch of people moved out. So the city shrunk in population. Maybe 30, 40,000 people in 2 years. As a result of which, there was a lot of cheap housing available, and a whole bunch of people moved in. And they didn't really care whether the people living across the street are white, black, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, went to church at all. Very different from a lot of the old tribes we had in Boston And I think that the desegregation order unwittingly helped to reinvent the city into the place we know today. You know, I actually believe in what the Bible tells us, and I think that the goal is not to be spiteful, but to help people. That's Christian with a capital C and a small c, but
Yeah.
those messages are in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, and other religious texts. Looking at it today, there's nothing in any religious text that says take an immigrant and belittle them,
Yeah.
beat them up. It says welcome the stranger, right?
Yeah.
Welcome the stranger, for we were strangers in the land of Egypt, right? Same messages throughout Scripture. And sort of that's the way I was taught and the way I tried to teach my children, and the way I think we should live.
I think it's wonderful, and it falls right into the one of the underlying tenets of this podcast, which is the idea that we have a shared humanity and that we have to treat each other that way. There's a astronaut I might be interviewing down the road, and he wrote a whole piece around when he looked at the Earth from above. He just saw one planet. He didn't see any lines that separated countries or towns or cities or continents. He just literally saw that one place. So your idea and your concept and your reading of any religious text that shows we need to treat each other kindly and with compassion is hugely important. And certainly as you look into an office environment as well, right? Like that's how we should treat each other. You don't treat somebody that's cleaning the bathrooms any differently than you treat somebody that's working on a big important deal, because everybody has that shared humanity.
One of my favorite people downtown is a Hispanic lady. I must admit I do not know her name. Her job is to go up and down the staircase leading into the Post Office Square garage, and she keeps it shining. And I say good morning to her, and she says good morning back. I hope other people say good morning to her. That's probably as good a person as there is on planet Earth. But a lot of old white dudes like me may not give her the time of day.
It's a shame. I mean, from a personal front, that was my job in college. I cleaned the stairwells of one of the dorms. I had my headphones on, and sometimes my friends said hi, sometimes they didn't, but I can appreciate that work. It's work. It's honest work, and she's a kind person that's just trying to make her way through the world. So,
The other thing, Todd, I learned in the 70s is that I would sit in a living room in the black community. And then the next night I might sit in a living room where everybody's white. And if you had a transcript of the conversations, they were the same basic issues. People want their kids to be safe. People want there to be jobs available. They want the snow to be plowed, the trash to be picked up, the fire department to show up. All pretty basic things. And yet we let, perhaps, the press divide us more than was, I think, intellectually honest.
Yeah, I agree with you, and we need to do a better job of kind of weeding through those things, and again come back to the idea that, to your point, regardless of the ethnic makeup of the households you were in, they had the same basic issues. We want to be healthy. We want our kids to be happy. We want them to be safe. And those are basic things that we obviously need to do. And when you focus on some of the things that you did, right? And in the 70s, Boston was a much, much different city than it is today. There was so much turmoil in the 70s. It's now this affluent global hub. Mr. Rogers used to remind us a lot that to understand where we're going, we have to remember where we came from. And when you think about that in the context of these modern corporate and civic leaders, it's hugely important that they don't forget the painful history of the cities they've operated in. Um, how do you see remembering our past mistakes and what we went through as making us more empathetic neighbors today?
I think the best thing I have done in the past few years, I have been happy to partake in oral histories. And I have, for whoever wants to listen at Mass Historical or other places where I've recorded oral histories, I've told them my recollections of what happened, because the people writing history today, they weren't there. I was. Story, it's in my book. I remember like we're yesterday, I'd given a speech in Baltimore, and I was on the phone. I was told that Kevin White had called a march against violence. Almost exactly 50, it was 50 years ago this spring, before the Queen came, before we cut the ribbon on Quincy Market. And I show up at the March Against Violence, and other than Kevin White, there's no other citywide elected officials. They boycotted it. Not saying they were for violence, but they were worried if they showed up at the march that some of the leaders of the anti-busing resistance might have suggested that they were going over the other side, whatever it was. And I know my colleagues quite well, and a lot of them didn't have a mean bone in their body, but they were scared that the Roar, as the group was called, not unlike the Tea Party or other groups which have arisen through the years, would show up on election day and defeat them. And for many of these folks, this is their livelihood. So I remember that real well. It was up front, it was Cardinal Medeiros, a sweet man, but not very political. Senator Brooke, gentleman of color, first senator of color since Reconstruction. Kevin White, and me in the front row. No other elected officials. No white state reps, no white state senators. They were just terrified. Those days are behind us, and very thoughtful, very thankful for them.
No, it is, and that we've certainly come a long way. Although, we still have a long way to go. It was interesting, just anecdotally, as I was thinking about, I came across a photo of myself from the parade in Sudbury in 1976. I was on my bike, and I still remember I was super excited decorating my bike. But I look back at that 7-year-old and think he didn't really understand what had happened in the previous 200 years and where we came from. And it's now 50 years later, and I still feel like we still have a lot more work to do, and we need to do less flag waving and more listening. And, you practiced law for decades, and you've been a consultant for a very long time. And part of what I think you specialized in a lot was in mediating and resolving complex municipal issues, commercial disputes. And as you mentioned, you were sitting next to that motherly figure back in the 70s on the city council, where you could find some common ground in terms of getting along. So looking back now, 50 years later, how have you been able to get people who have these fiercely opposing interests to sit in a room, find common ground? Because, Fred Rogers always talked a lot about finding the helpers in times of stress. And we live in a very polarized world right now where everybody wants to sue or attack their opponent. How are you able to continue to coach adults, just lower their guard, lower the temperature, and use these two things on the side of our heads to truly listen to what the other side is saying?
I think the worst thing that's happened in the past 5 or so years is that face-to-face meetings have been replaced by people looking into screens.
Like we are
That's
today.
no way, like today. It's not a good way to do business. Many of my most successful real estate transactions were negotiated in the hall outside room 801 before a zoning board hearing. I did 1,000 of them probably through the years. And you have to get people in a room. And once you get them in a room and you get the veneer off, I think you can always find common ground. I joke sometimes, Todd, that I can mediate anything because I had three daughters. And when you have three daughters, you're a mediator, right? And mine were born the same day, so that complicates things even more.
Yes, it does.
Um, and when I think of some of the deals I put together through the years, it's because I try really hard to find something in common with everybody in that room. And way down deep, we have a lot of things in common. The papers don't want you to necessarily know that, but we do. A lot of us have things in common.
Well, that's like I said, that's that shared humanity, and I think when you are able to listen, that's the starting point. Because a lot of people, even if they might at some level know that there's some commonality amongst themselves, they're so myopic in their thought process, and they just want to get what they want to get, that they just don't want to listen and see that yes, there really is commonality, there really is this shared humanity. I mean, I think back, when I was 22, I think in my first year of law school as well, but I did not have the level of responsibility that you did. I mean, it's shouldering immense public responsibility. The eyes of the city are on you. You're the youngest councilman. And, we talk a lot on this program, on this podcast with folks about how leaders can maintain a sense of calm in spite of intense external and even internal pressure. When you look back at that 22-year-old, what was your personal anchor that allowed you to maintain a sense of calm, find common ground, to be able to get things done?
Truth be told, I was living at home because I couldn't afford to live anyplace else. I chose to run for office. I chose to go to law school and then to the Kennedy School. So when I got home, usually mom and dad were there and they'd ask me how the day went. And my mother had taught in South Boston. She was very familiar with the community. She was teaching in Dorchester at the time. And my dad had grown up in the city. Both my parents had. Daddy came over as a small child, but they were city kids. So they knew the city. They knew the neighborhoods. They had friends who were of every imaginable background, and that's the way we were taught. Everybody was always welcome at our home. That's just the way we were taught. So I think having them to talk to when I got home probably gave me a little bit of stability. I had a wonderful administrative assistant, Jim Dolan, my friend to this day. He was from Brighton, which is very far away from Dorchester and a lot of the rest of the city. And so he would give me that perspective. And I didn't hide. I was always out there. And you find out a lot just picking up a newspaper at the corner store or picking up your shirts at the dry cleaner or whatever. And I think part of the difficulty with my friends in Washington is they are continuously surrounded by a retinue, so they don't get to talk to the common man and woman as often as they should. And I think part of the difficulty is many of the members of Congress live in Washington, D.C. That's where their families are, and then they come back to Massachusetts. And I'm not so sure that's the way the founders intended it. I think they intended that they would come to Washington, stay for a few months, and then go back, if you take a look at history. And I was very much in touch with the people I represented because I was always out there.
Right.
And only time I ever had police escort was when there was a death threat in the Bunker Hill Day Parade. Other than that, it was just Larry walking down the street.
Well, the hallmark of great leadership is just that, understanding the people you're working with or representing. I interviewed the former chief people officer at USA Today, and he told me that every morning before COVID, he would go down into the office and he would talk to all of the employees who were there, and not just say, "Hey, how you doing?" but, "Hey, what's going on in your life? How are things going? Oh, do you have plans this week?" And just understanding, and that kind of goes back again to that shared humanity. Where do you find common ground? And you only find common ground when you ask the questions and then listen to the answers. So I think it's wonderful that you have that take, because it's true. You need to be able to work with people and lead people only when you understand what their needs are and what their capabilities are. And you can't do that
I share
from,
space with a law firm, and when they have summer associate law students, I always take each one of them out for lunch. And one of the ones this summer went to Boston Latin School, so
nice.
you got to be okay, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I find out so much listening to them. I'd like to think they find out listening to me. And one of the difficulties about people working at home so much, and it comes in really handy for me on a bad day, I must admit, if it snows or something, you don't talk to somebody by the coffee machine. And you don't find out that somebody has a sick child, or somebody just had to put grandma in the nursing home, or whatever the case might be. Everybody has stuff, and
Yes.
they bring the stuff to the office, and as much as they may try to repress it, it's out there. I mean, my I would be sitting at the office, and I get a phone call, nobody picked up the girls at school. So I had to drop everything, drive, go pick them up, bring them home. So we all have stuff going on in our lives. Um, I
But
had a
we only find
review.
out when we ask the questions and listen to the
Yeah, and
answers.
if we don't talk, we don't find out. I had a review back when I was with a big firm. It was 2000, I think. And somebody said, "Gee, your hours are really down this year." I said, "Yeah, my mother's spent 2 months in a hospital. She's had two major operations. I get the healthcare proxy. Well, do better next year." As if like right over their head. I mean, how can you be at an office and not think of your mother being in a hospital bed,
Of course.
or your children not being picked up at school? So it's very important to understand that. And I'm happy to have, I used to host a big open house and invite all the lawyers who I worked with, because I thought it was really, every year around the holidays, I thought it was really important for the older partners, the one making the decisions, to see the lives that the younger partners had. And I think that's very important.
No, I think that's a wonderful way to be able to bring people together outside of an office environment so they truly do understand. Because to your point, you don't know what you don't know, right? And the only way to find those things out is to create an environment where people not only are available to have conversations, but feel comfortable too, right? If you are in an office situation, or wherever it happens to be, and the person that's leading you doesn't allow you to be comfortable to talk about those things, and you repress those things, that's going to impact your work product, and it's going to impact your home life. And it becomes this cyclic thing and this domino that falls over, because, when you have a toxic work environment, what happens when you go home, right? What happens? Who are the kids going to mirror? They're going to mirror that behavior that they're seeing from their parent. You're going to have issues with your spouse, whatever it happens to be. And so creating an environment that affords people that opportunity to have a shared humanity, to get to know each other, is remarkable. It was interesting because I didn't know this until you agreed to do the podcast, and I started doing more research. But I had no idea that, you ran for office in 1983 for mayor, and you weren't elected. But they recently made a documentary entitled "The Best Mayor We Never Elected," and referencing that failed mayoral run in '83. Um, in any walks of life, but certainly in politics, winning seems to be the only metric in terms of success. Yet, when you look back at your incredible civic, charitable, and legal input that you've had in Boston over the last decades, four or five decades, without a title, right? You were never the mayor of Boston. How do you think leaders can shift their mindset away from purely just climbing the corporate ladder to get the next title or promotion, and instead try to focus on the actual footprint of care that they're leaving behind within their office or their community?
Well, somebody once told me that I may have had more influence over the city of Boston than I might have had I been elected, because I've been so active and been in the middle of the scrum in various ways for decades now. I wish I'd been elected mayor, but the next day I was on the subway at 8 a.m. You never look back; you just look forward.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I ran, and I'm glad I've been active and remain active. Just had lunch today with this wonderful young man. I've mentored him the last 20 or so years, and he has a new job, and he wants to do this and do that. I said, you have to go to whoever you report to at this big institution and say that you want to join this organization, that organization. You want to be in the scrum. It's very, very important. And one of the difficulties with Boston is we've become a branch town, and so many of the civic leaders are not the ones calling the shots, is that it's tougher to get those people in a room. I mean, I was on the city council when the city was on its knees financially. I'd sit down with Dick Hill from First National Bank of Boston, John LeWare, later on the Fed board, Sharmat Bank. Those folks who run those major institutions, with a couple of exceptions, are not in Boston anymore. So that makes it tougher, makes it much tougher.
But it is interesting because you found your success without requiring that title. I love the fact that, yeah, you lost the election. The next day, you're back on the subway, and you're still in the scrum. You're still doing what you have to do. And that sort of always, to me, that begs the question in terms of who you were at that age and even before that. When we think about, or at least Fred Rogers used to think a lot about, the people who shape us into the caretakers of our community, right? The ones who loved us, the ones who guided us, the ones who anchored us, and helped instill values during our early years. You grew up in Dorchester, and you mentioned, obviously, Boston Latin, where you attended. Was there a particular foundational helper or mentor in your life who looked at you and realized that you were meant to be this guardian for the city of Boston?
Well, I'm not so sure there was one person, but I did have two of the counselors I served with were especially kind to me. Joe Moakley was on the council with me the first year. He really took a liking to me, and I took a liking to him. We were very close, and we remained close till the day he died. And Chris Ionella I had known before I was on the city council, because his son, who's now on the governor's council, was a student at Latin school a few years behind me. And he kept his eye out for me. He'd lecture me as well, but kept his eye out for me. So having figures like that, I grew up in a very strange Italian family. Both my parents were only surviving children, so I had no aunts, no uncles. Most people have aunts and uncles to help out in these things. Those guys were my pseudo uncles, and they kept an eye out for me. Um, and you mentioned Latin school. In the preface to Frothingham, I mentioned the English teachers I had at Boston Latin School. I had four of them who influenced me significantly, and that's maybe one of the reasons I can write. It doesn't come out of the sky.
No.
It starts a long time ago. And Mr. Hughes, the seventh grade English teacher when I was 12, He was the one who encouraged me to go out for public speaking. And you can make the case that I haven't shut up ever since.
Well,
So,
we don't mind hearing you talk, Larry, so that's okay. So we'll give him the credit for that too.
yeah. And so I think having teachers, and I mean, most everybody I know who's had a success of any sort has good teachers, and they're very important. Richard Neustadt, I took his course as an undergraduate. I took his course as a graduate student. That's quite something. I remember all those messages that he gave me. I studied with Oscar Handlin, Galbraith, Reisman, some of the giants of that era, and I learned plenty just listening to them.
So the idea of it takes a village. There was certainly a village of people around you who helped mold you into being the incredible Bostonian and civic leader that you've been, and the influence is amazing. I mean, again, I've known you for like 25 plus years that I've been back in Boston, and you, in my estimation, in terms of how I looked at this and why I chose you to be part of this podcast, was because you are a beacon, right? You're writing the things that you've said, your experiences around bridging people together is something that was unheard of in the 70s when there was so much division. And quite frankly, even today, there's still so much division. And the idea that there are people like you that are saying, hey, let's look beyond our differences and let's focus on what makes us symbiotic and provides a guidepost for finding that common ground, finding that shared humanity is hugely important. And we need more of that. And so as you look at like the next generation of people, what's sort of your big message that you would sort of push back to say, hey, we can do better, and here's just some of the simple things that you can be doing?
Right. The first simple thing you can do is talk to everybody. Don't put up a wall. I sometimes think in big institutions, you can only talk to A, you can't talk to B or C. They don't let you talk to B. And that's why when I was in management at the law firm, I'd make it my business to I would play softball with the kids in the mailroom.
Yeah.
And the secretaries. And you learn an awful lot just by having a beer after the game with folks who otherwise you may not be speaking. That's very important. And I think the stratification that has happened in this country has not been healthy. Way down deep, we're all in this together. And as I said, you can close your eyes or get a transcript, and what people say in the living room in Roxbury is the same as a few miles away in Southie. It's not that different. The other message I would have, I fear that because people don't study as much history as we did 50 years ago, people don't understand history. I mean, I was in the middle of some very difficult financial times in Boston, and I'd like to think I helped to steer the city out of it. We have to remember that the little bumps in the road we're having now are not the first time. The city was not always a prosperous place as it has been for these many decades. And there are very important facts of history that people, they don't ignore, but nobody's ever told them.
Right.
How do I know this? I get phone calls. And they say, gee, what happened back then? Well, it's all up here. I don't forget. And we came very close to not being able to pay our bills in the late 1970s. In 75, New York City defaulted. They would always say they didn't default, but I'm from Dorchester. If you don't pay your bills, you've defaulted, right? They couldn't pay their bills.
Yep.
It resulted in a major law firm crashing because they'd given the legal opinion. It was very difficult times. As a result, the bond ratings of all the older cities in America were rapidly downgraded. almost to junk bond status, which meant it cost more to borrow money. At one point in the late 70s, we borrowed money at 9.22%. So people were looking for a tax-free note, 9.22%. That's like 18% taxable because the marginal tax rates were much higher. That's not a good situation. That's basically not sustainable. By the way, nor is the national debt at the current trajectory, but that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have all this stuff in between these little ears of mine. You say, you have to use them. I used them. I have a lot of that I've remembered from being in the middle of those very difficult times before.
No, it's great advice, because the thing about history isn't so much that you look back on all of it with nostalgia. You look back on it to say, what can we do differently? What did we learn? How do we make it better? And even sort of in a short-term history, when you're working for a company and you have a deal that goes south in January, and then a similar opportunity comes forward in July or August, understanding what went wrong in January is beneficial to July or August. The same holds true in any other walk of life. It's learning from our mistakes, and the idea of not forgetting history is hugely important. And I love the fact that you're obviously still here and vibrant and able to explain to us what happened and why it happened and what we could have done differently and what we learned from it. It's you know it's a wonderful thing to have somebody like you around to do that. You really were a steward of Boston for so long and continue to be, as you now pass on whatever knowledge you have to the next generations. Is, like you said, you're meeting with folks 20, 30, 40 years younger, and hopefully
50 years younger now. I could be their grandfather.
So we won't say that. I didn't say that. You said that, but okay. You're meeting with the next Larry DiCara, who at 22 or 23 is looking to make that huge impact in their city or town, or office or whatever it happens to be, and that's history, right? That's a big part of it. It's experience that you're able to share with people. And Fred Rogers was a huge. That's what his whole thing was. He was a storyteller, and those stories emanated from his own experiences, and then the experiences that he learned from other people that were on his program because he listened to them, and then he passed that knowledge along to the next folks. And that's where we find the shared humanity. And that's what I love about this, and that's why I'm so thankful that you obviously agreed to participate on this podcast, because I think that the folks listening will have a deep appreciation for what you've done for the city, and maybe they'll go and they'll watch the documentary, they'll read Frothingham, and they'll appreciate even more not just you as a person, but your experiences as they lead their own lives and have their own problems that they're faced with. So thank you, Larry. It's
Great
been
to be
wonderful
on,
chatting
Todd.
with you today. I'm deeply appreciative of the things that you've done, and I'm sure that the people watching will be as well.
My pleasure.
All right, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll get this out soon.
Okay, great.
Take
Bye
care.
now.
Bye bye.